What difference will the Houthis' involvement in the war make? They've launched missiles at Israel in support of Iran and threatened more attacks. What are the consequences of opening a new front? And given the Yemeni group's proximity to the Red Sea, what could it mean for global shipping? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. They have threatened to join the war ever since it started a month ago. Now Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, has followed up on their threat and launched missiles towards Israel. It marks a significant escalation. The Iran-aligned group is based in Yemen, and it's feared they could attack shipping in the Red Sea, as they've done before. That would further disrupt global trade, already affected by Iran's blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. So, will Israel and the US retaliate? And if so, how? And how could all of this shape the war? We'll put those questions to our panel of guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, enter the war, targeting Israel in support of Iran. On the streets of the Yemeni capital Sana'a, which is under the group's control, people rallied.
We came out here to send a message of solidarity to the Iranian people, their leadership and Iran's Revolutionary Guard, which is facing the most powerful tyrants on earth, the United States and Israel. We stand with them and with the axis of resistance.
The axis of resistance refers to Iran-backed groups such as the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. A spokesperson says the Houthis fired a barrage of missiles at sensitive Israeli military sites.
We will continue to carry out military operations in the coming days until the criminal enemy ceases its attacks and aggression.
Although they are arguably the most powerful of Iran's non-state allies, the Houthis' firepower is no match for the Israeli military on the ground or in the air. But the group does have leverage, which it has used before. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, between Africa and the Middle East, off the coast of Yemen. It's only around 30 kilometres at its narrowest point, but 12% of globally shipped goods passes through the waterway. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has already largely blocked the Strait of Hormuz, another maritime corridor. That's preventing exports of oil and gas supplies from leaving the Gulf, pushing up energy prices. Any closure of Bab el-Mandeb would exacerbate the disruption, leading to delays and higher costs, as ships would be forced to use longer routes. Between 2023 and 2025, the Houthis attacked Israeli-linked vessels in the Red Sea, sending global supply chains into disarray and leading to losses in the billions of dollars. These latest strikes come as the US and Iran are holding indirect talks, part of a regional push for peace. Both sides have issued conditions to end the war. But even while these diplomatic efforts play out, the attacks are escalating. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
There is a lot to discuss, so let's meet our panel of guests who are joining us for today's Inside Story. From Washington, D.C., we're joined by Hisham Al-Omeisy. He's the senior Yemen advisor at the European Institute of Peace. In Cairo, H.A. Hellyer, a senior associate fellow in Defence and Security Studies at the Royal United Services Institute. And our third guest is from Whitefish, Montana. Michael Mulroy is a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for the Middle East. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us for our discussion today. Let me start with you, H.A. We're at the 1 month mark in this war. The Houthis stayed on the sidelines until now. What do you think changed?
So I think that the Houthis already threatened to resume attacks in the Red Sea in response to the Iran war. But I think that they were holding back, probably for a number of different reasons, one of which would have been, frankly, directions from Tehran. I don't think that they would have made this decision to just go it alone. I think that it would have been done in coordination. There may be some domestic issues at play here as well, within Yemen itself, in terms of opening up new fronts. And I don't think that they want to necessarily antagonize the Saudis unless they really have to. But they've certainly made that decision now. Having said that, they haven't done everything that they could do, and I think that that is something that we should keep in mind about the way this war has unfolded over the past month. These haven't been wild, crazy, ad hoc escalations. They're following a pattern. They're being precise. They're being very calculating, which makes them not less dangerous. But I think that unfortunately we're likely to see more things go in the future as compared to right now.
Hisham, same question to you. Why now?
Well, they're following a staggered approach. This is basically a retaliation for the increasing attacks on Iran. The Houthi spokesperson specifically mentioned the attacks on the infrastructure in Iran, and this being a response to that, but also in support of the axis of resistance. We've seen what happened with Hezbollah over the past couple of weeks and the increasing pressure on them. And the Houthis are expanding those fronts so that the US and Israel will be fighting at multiple fronts in an attempt to ease that pressure on the other members of the axis. There's been a lot of talk with the US saying they're going to be putting boots on the ground, and the Houthis are hoping to deter an invasion by basically signaling that now that they have joined the fighting, they could additionally escalate and disrupt global trade and oil shipments if they choose to shut down Bab al-Mandab. But just referring back to what Dr. Hellyer also said, joining now allows them to rally support at home. Remember, the Houthis are portraying themselves as defenders of the Muslim cause, and they want to distract from the Yemen's internal challenges, the economy, the governance. They want to project power beyond their borders. And despite the attacks of the Israelis on the infrastructure, on their leadership over the past year.
Mick, in the first term of President Trump, you were in the leadership in the Pentagon. This war already, many observers say, is not going well. How do you think they will see this development in the Pentagon now?
It's good to be with you all. I would agree, first of all, that it's likely completely coordinated with Iran. Iran views them as a strategic asset. They supported them for years. As you said, this is not a new issue. We've been dealing with it for many years. And I think Iran has a plan. The plan included seizing the Strait of Hormuz, and likely is going to include initiating the Houthis to potentially disrupt the flow of commercial vessels in the Red Sea, and specifically the Bab el-Mandeb. So I think that's what we're, of course, concerned about, because it would take the current economic global issue and compound it substantially. How the Pentagon is going to deal with it, likely how we've dealt with everything so far. Major air campaigns trying to deplete their ability to launch these missiles and drones. That's unlikely to be completely successful, and all they have to do is to hit a few commercial vessels, and it will shut down. Because even if we can militarily deal with it, it's more than just that. We have to convince these commercial vessels and those that insure them that it's safe, and that is a big issue for the military, and something we've been discussing, since I was in the Pentagon.
H.A., just tell us a little bit more about the relationship between the Houthis and Iran, because they are close, they are allies, but my understanding is the Houthis are not under direct Iranian command. They don't necessarily do what Tehran says always.
I think that's a good way to put it. I think that, frankly, when you think about the allied militias across the wider Middle East that are, quote unquote, part of this resistance axis that, of course, is centered in Iran, they're all, well, not all, but particularly when it comes to the Houthis and Hezbollah, these are not simply Iranian agents. They have their own domestic concerns. They have their own issues at home to think about, but they are very strongly allied with Tehran. And in different cases, and of course in different conflicts, rely tremendously on Iranian support. When it comes to the Houthis in this particular case, with or without Iranian direction, I think that they would have wanted to get in on the action. But I think that they have decided that it's best to coordinate their actions with Tehran in this case. I suspect that there were messages, and I'm speculating here, but I suspect that there were messages to Tehran earlier saying, we'd like to jump in. Do you think now would be a good time? And they were probably told, no, why don't you hold off for a bit? But I think you're also correct that they don't necessarily do everything that Tehran wants at every stage, not necessarily in this conflict, but more generally speaking. And that's been the case in terms of the militias in Iraq. It's been the case for Hezbollah. There aren't going to be clear lines of command and control as though these groups were all simply extensions of the IRGC. They're not. It's more complicated than that. They're deeply allied, but I don't think that they take every marching order from Tehran.
Hisham, tell us about the potential threat for now, if for now they are targeting Israel and that's it. Tell us about the threat to Israel, because we have seen this before after October the 7th, 2023, when the war started in Gaza. The Houthis repeatedly fired at Israel. Most of that didn't hit, but they have hit their targets before. I think the most notable occasion was in 2024 when Prime Minister Netanyahu came back from the UN General Assembly, having ordered the death of the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. They managed to hit Ben Gurion Airport on that occasion. Yes, they did. And for the time being, I honestly think it's a little bit more performative. It's about sending a message. They've been lobbing a lot of drones, a lot of missiles in the past. And damage-wise, it has been insignificant. The reason that they did now, they just wanted to signal their entry into the conflict, that now that they have joined the war, they could do a lot more damage in the Red Sea. That's where the real strategic objective exists. And they haven't done that for now because they have certain discussions ongoing with the Saudis. Again, just as Dr. Hellyer mentioned, there's a bit of coordination also with Tehran and the other members of the Axis, that this can be the second escalatory step. So they're holding back a bit. They could use that card when necessary. And if and when the US troops arrive in the region with boots on the ground. And for the time being, it's a bit of a waiting game. Mick, do you think they'll be worried in Washington about potential attacks on US assets as well as Israeli assets, even if they don't stop shipping at this stage? My understanding is that one of the two US aircraft carriers, the Abraham Lincoln, is now just off Salalah in Oman, which is very close to the Yemeni border. It could be targeted by the Houthis.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've got several naval assets right in the region, and they are vulnerable to missile attack. They have, of course, very good defenses, but no defense is impervious. And that's a big concern, because it's not only going to be coming from one direction, but now it could potentially be coming from another. So, yes, I think they're very concerned about this, and they're probably thinking that there's a potential that the Houthis are being somewhat held back because they want to see where these negotiations go. But if the U.S. launches a ground operation to, say, take Karg Island or some of the islands around the Strait of Hormuz, or even the ability to recover the HEU, the Houthis could be requested to jump in. I totally agree that they're on the lower end of control when it comes to proxy forces, but they also have a pure motivation to attack and fight the Americans. So I think that's a real concern and a real possibility, and something that I think Iran knows that the U.S. has to take into our calculation when and if we decide to launch an actual ground operation.
HEU, the highly enriched uranium that is somewhere buried in the rubble, we think, after that bombardment by the US last year. Also last year, HA, there was the bombardment of the Houthis by the US. 6 weeks, in fact, 52 days of bombardment. At the end of that, President Trump seemed to respect them. He said on the day that the truce came into force, they had a great ability to withstand punishment. Do you think that truce between the Houthis and the US is still in place right now?
I think we'll see. I think it'll be the next few days when we identify how far that still goes. The Houthis, of course, are very strongly aligned with the Iranians. I think that they do not see these negotiations as negotiations. I don't think anyone really does. I think what's going on right now are the preparations, very hopeful, optimistic preparations for negotiations going forward. But all of this talk from the White House and the Trump administration indicating that there's great amounts of talk going on with these negotiations, I think, frankly, is quite farcical. Nobody really takes that seriously, nor should they. Moreover, even if there were negotiations going on, I think it will take a lot of work to get the Iranians to come to the table in those negotiations, considering that twice now, in the midst of negotiations, the United States has attacked Tehran, has attacked the Iranians. The Iranians are odious, don't get me wrong. It's a horrible regime. But if we're trying to engage with the regime in order to de-escalate or negotiate, this simply isn't going to work. So when it comes to how the Houthis are going to respond to the United States, remember when that deal came in, a lot of this very recent, of course, history, we're only talking less than a year and a half of this Trump administration, but a lot has happened since those discussions that led to the ceasefire with the Houthis came into play. And this is now, I think, identified by this so-called axis of resistance as being an existential conflict for the Iranian regime. And it is.
Hisham, I've seen some speculation that the Houthis may also be trying to send a message to Saudi Arabia. There was a full-scale war with Saudi Arabia from 2015 that went on for 7 years. There's a sort of fragile truce in that one as well. Do you think there's any truth in the fact that they're trying to send a message to Saudi Arabia? Because there have been talks between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia, and the Houthis want money from Saudi Arabia, don't they?
Yes, they do. And I'm glad you raised that point, because the Houthis, for the past few months, they've been escalating with their rhetoric against the Saudis, trying to extract additional concessions, trying to move forward with the Yemen peace agreement, which has been constantly delayed because of local events, especially with the Southern Transitional Resistance, the debacle we've had at the end of December, beginning of January. And they've actually issued statements just last week where they demanded that the Saudis start making payments towards public salaries in Houthi-controlled areas. And right now, the Houthis are basically saying, you cannot continue to ignore us, Saudi. We know that you're dealing with a lot of issues in the region, but we've been waiting for a very long time, and there hasn't been any breakthroughs in the discussions or binding agreements, if you will, or payments being made. So again, this is a shot across the bow for the Saudis. And now that the Houthis realizing that the Saudis are using their West-East pipeline and exporting mainly through the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea. So again, this is a message from the Houthis saying, we could hurt you if you want to, if we raise the stakes and shut down Bab el-Mandab. So you better start to attend to our demands.
Nick, when you see the way this is going, you are a former senior Pentagon official. You were Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon, but you're also a retired US Marine reservist, a retired CIA paramilitary operations officer. When you see where it's going across the region, do you fear that, had this been a few years ago, this is the sort of occasion when you might have actually had to go into battle on Iranian soil? Do you think that now is a real possibility, US boots on the ground?
I do. I mean, ultimately, shifting an asset like the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit from the Indo-Pacific to the Middle East indicates to me they intend to use it, or they would not have done it. I mean, I have questions about why these assets weren't in the region in the first place. It looks like this was planned to essentially just be an air campaign, and perhaps that's what it should have been, and then we should have found a way out diplomatically. But it's clear to me that all the indications, not only of the 31st MU, but now we have the 11th MU en route. We have the immediate response force from the 82nd Airborne Division that should be there within days. it indicates to me that we have potentially underestimated the Iranians' ability to control the Strait of Hormuz. We don't believe negotiations are going to work, and we intend to try to forcibly open it. That would be a major escalation.
Mick, let me just get in there.
Obviously, the Iranians
Mick, if
are
I
going
can
to
get in there very
respond.
quickly, if you were one of those Marines in those Marine expeditionary units you mentioned, would you have some trepidation? Do you fear this could go very, very badly?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the Marines, if they're given the order, will take the island. There's no doubt about it, whether it's Karg Island, Abu Musa, whichever island. But the question I would have, of course, as a Marine, you don't really ask these questions, is what's the purpose? We can do it. How is this actually going to help us strategically? What if we get on Karg Island and we become, of course, infiltrated with nonstop indirect fire, and the Iranians simply don't care? They don't care, and they won't open up the strait simply because we control the mechanisms to process oil on that island. And then we just become essentially sitting ducks, and we might have to withdraw under fire. And that would be a big strategic, I think, failure for the United States, not because the Marines can't take the island, but it's because they can't necessarily explain to me why that would essentially open the strait. And that's the same, I think, when it comes to other potential operations for the Marines. And I do think there's a lot of questions on that inside the Pentagon from the uniform military officers that are responsible for planning these operations. But yes, I would be concerned not about necessarily myself, but about what is the actual purpose for this, and is it actually going to get us to where we want? Are we just doing it to do it?
HA, talk of the military being needed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. What, though, would be the global implications if that other vital strait in the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb, if that was closed by the Houthis? Because that is still something that they could do and they've tried to do before, reasonably effectively with hijackings and targeting with missiles, shipping in that strait.
Thank you, James. Before I get to that, just one slight additional comment to my colleague. I think that military minds do realize how difficult, how dangerous this sort of operation could be. The concern that I think many in DC now have is that this sort of information simply isn't getting to the top. That the president is not really being told all of this because, frankly, the current administration does not value expertise that contradicts the express preferences of the president. And I think that's a very dangerous structural flaw that exists in this particular Trump administration, which has led us to where I think we are right now. With regards to Bab el-Mandeb, anything north of 10% of global seaborne trade goes through this particular corridor. LNG, grain, and of course, containers of various things. It's a very narrow strait. It's 18 miles at its narrowest. There's no practical workaround. The closest workaround is going via the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, which means an extra 10 days of travel and an extra $1 million per voyage. So there's a lot that goes into what kind of cascading disruption this could have if Bab el-Mandeb becomes effectively inoperative.
And if they were to try and make it inoperative, Hisham, how easy would that be for the Houthis? And would it require a major operation or just a handful of strikes?
Just a handful of strikes. And just going back to what Mick said in the past, with aerial airstrikes, what have you, they managed to debilitate some of the Houthi capabilities, but did not take them off the chessboard. In fact, the Houthis have managed to build their capacity to build some of those components and outsource some part of it away from Iran. They've been getting a lot of stuff from China as well, for instance. And they've managed to rebuild over the past few months, and they've gotten really adept at that over the past 10 years of the conflict with the Saudis. So they have quite the stockpile to attack those ships and across those 18 miles. And all it takes is a couple of drones, which pretty much cost about somewhere between $2,000 to $5,000 to the Houthis. It takes a whole lot more to shoot down those drones. And it became exceedingly obvious in the last bout of conflict that Houthis could do a lot of damage with swarm attacks, not just by drones, but also seaborne UAVs as well. And it's difficult to protect all the ships all the time from the Houthi attacks, and the Houthis know it.
So, Mick, do you think there's a scenario that the Houthis do this, and then President Trump decides it's too costly for the global economy to continue? He abandons his war on Iran.
It is plausible, but I would agree with HA that normally this would have been gone through the policy coordination process in the National Security Council that used to exist in every administration up until now. So we've seen multiple reports that that's simply not the case anymore, and that this was planned by just a handful of people: the president, the vice president, secretary of defense, state, and the chairman. That's normally not the case. There's usually many discussions that bring in multiple different agencies, and all the issues and planning, including messaging, of course, which was really way off at the beginning of this, of why we went to war, would have already been thought through. And so I don't know if this is something that they've thought through or something they're just going to deal with if it happens. I don't, I guess there's different ways of doing things, but that's not how I think you run a war. You essentially have to plan for contingencies and what you're going to do if they happen. If the Houthis enter this and close down the Bab el-Mandeb, or certainly close it to the point where commercial traffic won't go through it, which is all they have to do, then we should have a plan in place. And potentially it is to avoid that potentiality instead of trying to deal with it when it happens. Because it's clear right now that when it comes to the economic aspect of this conflict, the Iranians have the upper hand. The United States, of course, has to deal with the consequences. Our partners and allies around the world have to deal with the consequences. And of course, ultimately, the United States is a democracy, and we have a vote coming up, and that matters. And I think the Iranians are certainly savvy enough to know all the above, especially the political implications of essentially escalating this war into one that involves ground forces.
Mick, Michael Mulroy, Hisham Omeisy, and H.A. Hellyer, thank you for joining us on our discussion today. For more on this story, why not visit our website, aljazeera.com, where you'll find plenty more context and analysis. We'd love to hear what you think. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or look for us on X. There, our username is @AJ Inside Story. That's it for now. From me, James Bays, and the team here. Stay tuned for Al Jazeera's comprehensive coverage of the war. It continues in just a moment.